I think that we are actually in the midst of a revolution and don't know it. And I think the times are changing extremely fast in the art world. And we had a so-called return to figurative painting in particular in the 1980s. And then that seemed to fade away, and we had an epoch when conceptual art appeared to be king, and when also successful artists appeared to be the CEOs of large-scale industrial enterprises. I think that we are now having a return, a cyclical return, to the idea of the handmade painted surface. The problem then becomes what is on that surface. I'll just very quickly liken the situation to the situation which exists in poetry, because I am a poet. I've published various volumes of poetry, I'm represented in anthologies, all this kind of thing. And I ran, dare I say it, the most important and celebrated poetry group of the 60s and 70s. So the thing which has always troubled me as a poet, and this is what I'm going to turn to Barley about, is that when you're a poet, you're condemned to perpetual striptease nowadays. The great myths no longer seem to work. And I've seen what this did to a number of my more celebrated contemporaries. Ted Hughes's life story has the contours of a tragedy. Not only 2 suicides, but actually 3, because his son committed suicide as well. And I remember looking at Seamus Heaney on the telly. I was in Northern Ireland for his 70th birthday, and Radiotopia Iran and the BBC were all doing famous Seamus programs. And the poor guy looked as if so stressed, he, like Atlas holding up the globe, or rather like Hercules holding up the globe for Atlas. And what I want to ask Polly about first is this whole question of the person. You're putting yourself into those pictures, right? Where do you go from there?
I wouldn't say I'm putting myself into them. I'm trying to come up with a general figure who's representing that bit of poetry that it's come from.
Do you want to just explain T.S. Eliot, why T.S. Eliot, first of all?
So these are all from The Wasteland, and this isn't at all me illustrating The Wasteland, this is me finding a place to start. So I'll find a useful line in the book, and then I'll run with it. Sometimes they work, sometimes they become too interesting as an illustration, and then they become too interesting as a painting, and I start ignoring the poem completely. But that's what I wanted them to be, was a starting point where I could then make paintings. Because I've got hundreds and hundreds of ideas for a painting, so I needed to narrow it down somehow. And this was a useful tactic.
But you bring alive this painting here is called The Drowned Sailor, and so that, all the titles of the paintings come directly from the poem. But The Drowned Sailor seems like such a fully formed image. In no way could you say this is an illustration. I would never imagine a drowned sailor to look like this. It's such a beautifully formed, poetic image. But it seems to just sort of come fully formed from you. To what extent do you have to kind of navigate that in your mind before you start painting? Or is it really a process of the painting that you find the story, that you find the character?
Well, starts sometimes as that illustration, and sometimes, like this painting, it became a block together of several other paintings. So there's a painting in the window up there of a little boat. Pretty pleased with that, so threw it onto a big canvas. Found a figure in a little painting that I was quite pleased with, and then threw him on top. That didn't work. That's had about 4 different figures on top. You can tell there's a cheeky little block trying to hide them all. But I'm also very keen for there to be, you know, those ghost images like this.
Yeah.
This biggest one. Whilst it's only got 1, 2, 3, 4 figures in it now. I think it's probably had 10, 15 figures in it at one point. So I'm just sort of wandering through,
Yeah.
having a great time.
And you mentioned the word ghost, which I think is a great word. They're quite important to you. I mean, you say I've kept them in or tried to hide them, but really they are supposed to be there, aren't they? They're to what extent can you still see them? Because I'm looking at your painting and I'm from a totally opposite perspective of seeing the end and trying to find the kind of ruminations and the navigations. But you've obviously been there and seen that. How much can you see them?
Well,
Can
probably
you see
much
ghosts,
more
is
than
what I'm
you.
asking you.
Can I see ghosts?
Yeah.
Absolutely.
You know, there's something I'd like to interject here. One of the fascinating things about these pictures is that they're very often examples of just enough.
Yeah.
They don't ram the whole composition through to a rigid conclusion.
Yeah.
The spectator is, it seems to me, allowed to fill in, to become engaged, and fill in the things which are not completed or not wholly there,
I
or
think
ambiguous. That's intentional, yeah.
Yeah, I think that's absolutely a tribute to T.S. Eliot. So whilst some of them are plucking a story out of this poetry, some of them are much more running with the idea of T.S. Eliot and his little poetry crowd. The Imagists were very keen on cutting down poetry, so anything that wasn't describing something or anything that wasn't dramatically important, they completely cut out of that poem. So it was, you know, this painting, that painting described in 3 or 4 words. And that's what I love, is that it was leaving big gaps for someone to fill in. And that's what I want my paintings to do, is be half finished, to leave a big empty space so you can decide what it might be or where it might come from.
Isn't this something rather specifically modernist? This interest in the artwork which still seems to be evolving in front of you?
Yes, and I think that's what the Imagists were doing, was running alongside the modernists and having a great time bouncing off each other, having conversations. But that's where this comes as a sort of tribute to those modernists as well. And also, whilst trying to make my own paintings, I'm throwing the paintings of about 10 different favourites in, mashing them up and trying to make it my own.
And you say favourites mean artists that you like. So
Yeah.
give us a rundown on who you admire.
It's some pretty drastic differences. Big fan of Rothko. Like, I spent a lot of my second year working on, or from Rothko's stuff, working on just some light on a wall. That most of my first year I was looking at Udlow, quite tight figurative paintings, quite a lot of portraiture, and then through third year I was just trying to bring them both together, really. And I think that's what second year was a really useful painting of abstract paintings, because it was sort of frustrating throughout, because I was spending all of my time trying to challenge myself to something I didn't know, but also coming up with lots of ideas for paintings that I could do at the end of second year when I'd done what I told myself
But
to do.
hasn't it been a problem recently with the recent arts that there has been a search in the visual arts for the idea of the radical, that if you're not radical, you're supposed to not very good. And yet the forms of radicalism have become increasingly institutionalised. You can only be radical in a particular way. Did you run up against this in your training?
Well, I think in terms of radical, sort of running out of radical. And that doesn't. I mean, not that I have a lot of knowledge here, but I think that's what I'm very keen to keep working on, is that I'm not trying to break any new ground at all. And that's why it was a pleasure going to Wimbledon, is that it wasn't a groundbreaker of a college. It was people trying to educate us to do as best as we could do in what we wanted to do. Whereas I think perhaps if you're at Goldsmiths, they might be whipping you a little.
Well, would you say that you're part of, in any way, a generation of artists who are sort of eschewing this sense of controversy or radicalism in favour of return to more historical ways, more modes of thinking, ways of seeing?
Well, I hope so. And I've got a lot of friends who are also very keen on figurative painting and non-threatening paintings which aren't something you go into a gallery and feel like you should feel a little guilty for having seen it. I want something to be fully absorbing, and I've got lots of friends who are very keen on that as well.
But that's not to say that these are necessarily all nice paintings. I mean, there's a lot of imagery here that is dark, and the response to the show's been outrageously successful. They've gone down very well, but there are figures in these paintings, and some of the imagery is so haunting, and there's like a melancholic quality to them. Do you see them as tragic? Do you see them as sort of disenfranchised, lost, or do you see them as heroes, or all of the above?
Well, I think that melancholic is a really useful description, really, and a great word I can steal. But that's something that T.S. Eliot was working on, and he was very keen for this whole poem to have that atmosphere and that mood throughout it. So that was because I was basing it on that poem. I decided that's what I wanted all the paintings to be carrying.
I've been, as you know, a chronicler of the modern, God help me, for a very long time. And the modern shifts all the time. But one of the things I think I've learned, you never can be sure in my situation if you've learned anything, is that someone in my situation does extremely well when looking at a young generation, a new young generation of artists, to see which artists excite their contemporaries. But there's a kind of energy generated in an emerging generation. There's a kind of mutuality. Would you agree that there is a sort of atmosphere, and that for people like me, it's very wise to think. I sometimes say to myself that my metaphor is that I'm looking into a pond full of excited goldfish. They're all swimming around. And in the middle of the pond, there are 3 slightly fatter goldfish. And the other goldfish are all turning towards those, looking towards those, and that is when you feel something electric beginning to happen in the art world. You feel the situation beginning to change. Would that metaphor work for you?
Well, here's hoping. I'd love to be a fat goldfish. That sounds
You don't want to be a fat goldfish?
Oh, I'd love to. That sounds brilliant. Maybe I could feed some of my gold ship friends. That sounds brilliant. But yeah, there's lots of figurative painters who I've been chasing around and hunting their work around various galleries, and I think it's those figurative painters who've managed to keep fighting through, like Peter Doig. His paintings, he just kept painting like this whilst all sorts of other drastic artwork came out. He kept ticking along, and it's going rather well. But there's lots of other figurative painters who I've been looking through, and sometimes at a drastic point in my studio when nothing's going very well, or it's becoming a little boring, I look through a list of artists and that's just really exciting, so I can copy something and then paint over it.
Well, we went through a very interesting phase. I'm talking specifically really about the 1990s and the YBA artists, the young British artists like Tracy Emin and Damien Hirst, where the kind of art world in London became very self-referential. You know, it really wasn't the done thing to be saying, oh, this artist inspires me, or so-and-so is interesting to me. Everything was new, radical, controversial, and it actually needed to not be explained.
Yeah.
And so, you know, I'm finding it personally really interesting having so many great conversations with artists and talking about their heroes, because for me it seems that there's a zeitgeist that we are looking back throughout art history and, you know, realising that nothing really can be new, but there are many, many things which were wonderful and exquisite, and potentially we've lost a bit of them, so how do we bring them back in? I mean, I'm curious to ask you how you feel being a painter and being such a young painter in a very digital age. I mean, really, in what way does your work sit outside of the digital age, or how do you embrace it? Where do you see it? I mean,
Well,
that
I
always
think
changed, but
I think that's really useful, really, because that makes a gallery full of paintings a lot more interesting to someone who sees images so much more often on a screen. It makes it more exciting to see it on a wall. And it's also been really useful for my paintings because, unashamedly, I spend hours on Flickr hunting through thousands of photos to see if there's anything that gets me quite excited.
we can see you doing that in this. He doesn't paint really quickly, this is time-lapse. He's on a lot of drugs in the studio. And so this is a photo every 5 minutes, I think, is it?
Yes.
Months.
I would say, I'd like to insert here that this fascinates me rather, partly because I am in fact the most computerized critic I know, in spite of my advanced years. But the other thing is that I had a conversation fairly recently with another recently emerged big star of an older generation, Tommy Baker. And we were talking about the way in which he uses internet found imagery for reference, but not the sort of things you would expect. That is, his raw material. There's one picture of his own was like, which is a cat. Well, it turns out that the cat started its life in art as on some kid's website as a bit of roadkill. And Charming somehow thought he would bring the cat to life again.
Friendly.
I somehow feel that might be a sentiment which you would.
That sounds a little wild. But I find, like, Photoshop's come in a little bit, and something which I put to bed again quite quickly, I think, because I'd sort of pull apart several images. I'm terrible at Photoshop, but I would just sort of cut around things just to save printing them out, putting them together and then scanning them back in again, really. But it also meant that my paintings got a lot more decided before they hit the canvas. And so I decided quite quickly that's a bad way to start. Because I really, it's so exciting when a painting's not working. And when I've got to decide what's coming next and how the hell I'm going to work that out. And so sometimes it works that I go back to the poetry and I decide to focus on a different point of it. Sometimes I just get a bit aggressive with a brush, but it's just great fun.
Well,
Listen, here I'm going to ask you, you were brandishing some reproductions of other people's paintings before this all started. Would you like to talk about those? Because I think they're very, very interesting in connection with your work.
Well, I found
Hold it up so
this,
people can see it.
I'm sure you can all see it all. This is Ron Kittai. I think this was in the 60s, 70s. He was painting his response to the wasteland. And this was one that I used in my dissertation, but only realised a few months ago that that's where it was from the wasteland. I'd clearly forgotten. But I just found that so interesting because I was looking into Kittai and all of his commentary on his work, and he essentially works exactly like I want to. When it's not working in a corner, he'll throw something else in, and throw images on top of other images until there's a real mess, which you can then try and sort out again. And that's why I think that painting was one that kept me involved for longer, was because I was trying my hardest for it to be completely fragmented, to have different images, different characters, different shapes coming in, and then occasionally just playing with a brush to come up with something which wasn't representing anything at all, as a sort of challenge to try and work it all out and see if you can settle with the fact that that's not anything. That's something that I'm really excited by. But then this is Peter Bruegel the Elder, and this is a pretty terrifying painting, done in the when was that done? Any idea? Early 16th century, 15th century.
Well, maybe
ages ago. And this was one of the paintings that T.S. Eliot was looking at whilst he was making The Wasteland, and it's pretty desolate, and it looks like the middle ground in the World War. But these are things which are so useful to refer back to, but I'm also finding myself terrible at referring to them and thinking through all this art history because I get too interested and start ignoring everything. But I think that was something that Kittai said. I paint in a library in which the history of art and other histories intervene every day in my painting. I wish I could do that. I've got piles of books, but I just never look at them if I'm having a good day painting.
I mean, what I think is interesting is that the poem itself, T.S. Eliot's poem, has got so much these kind of open-ended passages to it, and there's so much about it which is sort of seemingly unfinished, and the meaning is not entirely resolved. And I suppose in a way, that's what your paintings do, but they don't do it as a response necessarily to T.S. Eliot's Wasteland. I mean, they did that before you were painting about the Wasteland. I mean, your last exhibitions, you painted in the same way, so you sort of found a kindred spirit in T.S. Eliot, I suppose. Yeah. Who are your other kind of literary icons?
Well, I was painting from the beginning of third year when it got really exciting. I was painting from a little book of short stories, and just trying to pick something out of that short story, and then painting it as if the rest of the story didn't exist. So I was again trying to leave half a painting there, but otherwise I've just been working into those images. I think perhaps because that's something that my dad said would be a good idea, and it's suddenly really interesting. Yeah, do what Dad says. It's a good tactic. I recommend it. But yeah, it's these images, and there was T.S. Eliot, Ezra Pound, H.D., and they were just coming up with these open-ended poems which would make such an interesting painting if it came out.
Well, one thing I would like to note here, which isn't always noted, is that we're at the moment when there is a great deal of talk about the First World War because it's the centenary.
Yeah.
People sometimes forget that the wasteland is as much a product of the First World War as the poems much better known as war poems, Owen, Rupert Brooke and so on. But without the war, I think the wasteland would never have taken the form it did.
Yeah.
And that means, I'm going to say something perhaps rather tactless here, that we have to look at our own time, because what looks like that picture by Bruegel, which you have just brandished in front of us, well, I can tell you for me, it's like the news photographs of the crash in Donetsk, of the unfortunate Malaysian airline.
And this has got so many references to the World War, and so many references to friends which died in it, But this was all written when he was in a useful room over Margate, just after having a nervous breakdown.
In
and
Margate,
So, yeah.
Tracy.
looking over the Margate sands, and apparently that seemed to work with all this writing. Really should have been there by now. But yeah, I think there's so many references to his friends.
As you're a poetry lover and poetry doesn't benefit from the same kind of promotion and presence that music or painting does, do you feel in some way that you're a bit of an advocate for poetry by painting about great poets and being so poetical in your painting?
Good question.
Or do you not care?
I think I'm very keen to show this around and for people to know where it's come from, but I also am terribly focused or ignoring everything else. So I'm only looking at one poem, and this is only from the first of 5 sections of this poem, because I needed to just keep narrowing everything down. But yeah, my knowledge of poetry is still pretty minimal, and that's what I've been, since this show's gone up, I've been reading into it a lot more, and there's so much more I could be working from, but I question whether I'll ever be knowledgeable enough to start shouting about it, really.
So that sort of leads me to what can be one of our final questions to you, and then we can open it up, which is, you were saying you've been looking at poetry and since you finished painting this show, so what's next?
Well, I've got a big painting coming into a show here on the...
Oh yeah, we're doing a little advert now for my next show. But no,
10th of October?
Yeah, 10th of October. Exhibition with what Marcel Duchamp taught me.
Yeah, and so that's going to be all the artists in that. There's going to be quite a lot of them, and everyone responding to Marcel Duchamp's work. I'm still looking into what mine might be, but I think because of his famous painting of the woman walking down the stairs, I might be trying to put figure on top of figure, but then referencing the wasteland again, because there's a little bit of it and a painting which I thought I'd like to keep coming up with. Started running out of time and canvases, so I didn't go for that one. So I'm going to try and smash them both together and see if it works. But like that small painting at the end, the little blue one with 4 or 5 portraits on top of each other, I'm going to try and do that with maybe 10, 15 figures walking in a circle, see if it works.
It's worth pointing out that the element of literary reference involves a reversion to a great tradition in Western painting. I would say all the paintings based on the Greek epics, on Virgil, on Dante, Botticelli's drawings illustrating Dante, this kind of thing. This was a tradition which only began to fragment with the advent of modernism, and to some extent was resisted, of all people, by Picasso, who still has an eye for that kind of epic literary content. I think that is one of the things which begins to fascinate me about this particular moment in painting. As a cultural critic, well, purely as an art critic, I'm interested in this coming together of these kind of influences. Having sat in the poetry world for so long, before I sort of escaped into the office.
So, does anybody have a question for young Bartholomew? Yeah.
So, I have a quick question regarding the technical execution of the painting. I was quite interested to hear, before you started talking about Photoshop and how that comes into your practice, I was wondering, prior to you talking about that, how organic the paintings are in terms of their kind of composition. So the kind of top half of this painting here, the markings seem quite organic, but I wasn't sure if they were also quite conscious, quite planned out. Yeah, if you could maybe.
Well, I think as soon as it starts work on the canvas, then it's pretty spontaneous.
Sure.
Like some of them might start as a scribble on a bit of paper.
Right.
Some of them might start as a quite detailed drawing that I was pleased with, so put it into a painting. But as soon as they're on canvas, then it's me having a great time. So these like all this colour, whilst I'm trying to come up with perhaps an overhanging bit of forest, I was also very keen for it to perhaps not be that at all, and for it to just be colour and some overexcited strokes to battle that very dark space behind it. But yeah, this is very much me with some of my favourite colours left on the palette at the end of the day. I can have a great time and start throwing them in a canvas.
What about this one, which looks where you have all these blue things which look like bubbles and a half-length figure, which may be standing submerged in something, may not be, that kind of thing. Would you like to talk about that?
Well, lots of maybes once again. I won't tell you too much, mainly because I'm not sure. But this is called April, beginning of the poem. April is the cruelest month, breeding lilacs out of the dead land, mixing memory and desire, stirring dull roots with spring rain. And this is, again, this starts with T.S. Eliot referencing the beginning of the Canterbury Tales, and then he's talking about April as spring, and so battling between April being the most popular time for the newest bits, the newest attacks in World War One. They were saying that's when they started making all those moves, but apparently the first few years after the World War, that was the most fertile land through France, is when they had their strongest harvest because of all the people in it. So it's an interesting battle, as there is throughout this, which is just full of references. And so I was coming up with something which might be either, and a space where he might be in something deep. I might have just not given him any legs. But I again want this to be undecided, and that's something that comes out of some of my favourite paintings. I saw quite a lot of Sickards upstairs, and one of my favourite paintings in the National Gallery is a Walter Sickert painting of a woman on a bed, and her face is 4 strokes of paint. I think that's delicious.
Anyone else? Yep.
I was wondering, you said, and as Kate reiterated, your work, you never quite know when you finish, you almost leave it to the viewer to kind of interpret it as they will. But I wondered when you know when that point is, and do you look at your work hung on the wall and feel you maybe want to add to it as Whistler and Turner did, since it's been hung? And then a second question, you've kind of ghosted out, as Kate mentioned, you ghosted out some of the images of the 15 in this piece. Why did you not block them out completely?
First question, I think those finish points are sometimes me putting it aside, facing it to the wall to dry. Then I turn it round for its next hit, and I think maybe I'll just leave that one. Sometimes I've got a deadline, and I think perhaps deadlines are the most useful points in my work, because it means I have to have made those final decisions on a painting, and it also means some of the least finished or some of the paintings which have the least work into them. I come in and I see them at the private view, and they're the ones I'm most pleased with, because there are still so many decisions to be made. But I think with this one, that's something pretty deliberate, which means that there's quite a lot of figures still hanging about, and little bits of hands which I've left in, maybe a nose or two, because I want there to still be these ghosts of character. This was all an intention to make some commuters. There's a bit of writing about commuters going over London Bridge at the end of this first section of the wasteland, and I was trying to come up with those commuters in the wasteland, looking like they've been there for years and years, and I wanted just those bits of history where a figure hadn't quite gone right, but I'm always going to be pleased with it if there's a bit of it hanging out in there.
That's good.
Where are the figures from? Are the figures entirely imaginary, or do you have models at some stage, or some sketch, or where do they arise?
Never from models, though that's something I might be looking into, maybe going into a theatre or something. But all of these, well, there is one model actually.
Yeah, I was about
The
to
Hyacinth
say.
girl is in the room, so you know, look around if you will. But most of the other figures, I found them in maybe a magazine, maybe on Flickr, maybe it's a photo of a guy I saw in the street taken on my phone.
To what
but
extent do
there's
you
a-
consider them portraits? Are they kind of amalgamations of faces or just characters, or do you feel like such a connection with them, they're so formed that you could say they were a portrait?
They've never really hit that point, though. Doing paintings like this, it does make me really want to sit down with some portraits and make something which is definitely someone. But these two, for example, whilst they had a figure, they may have had several different faces, they may have had different hair, may have had a hat on, you know. I can just run through it and have a great time. But there's that one up in the corner, that was a picture of Roy Hodgson I found in the Evening Standard, and I really liked how he was sitting, and changed his head a few times until I was pleased with him.
I have a feeling that there are probably a lot of painters in this audience looking at it. Is that true?
I've had lots of painters. Put your hands
Go
up
on,
if you're a
raise your
painter.
hands. Wait.
Yeah, I was right.
I don't think my husband should have his hand up.
I think this makes my point about the way in which an art movement, a new shift in the art world, begins to coalesce. Don't you think so?
Well, here's hoping. No, that would be great fun. I mean, some of my closest friends are painters, and it does come up with brilliant conversations. But yeah, galleries are required to actually push that movement.
Thanks. You're welcome.
Actually,
You're welcome.
I'd like to say something that takes probably too modest to say, and that is indeed very much part of the tradition of this gallery. Conversations between painters,
Yeah.
isn't it?
Yeah, very much so.
Mm.
And it's been going on for over 100 years, and I think it's kind of important that the contemporary department now recognises that we have to keep that conversation going and find great artists to help us with that dialogue.
But for this Duchamp show in October, there's going to be painters. There's going to be
Installation
It's gonna be
artists,
everything,
performance
isn't
artists, all kinds of things. So we'll be an entirely different kind of visit, but you're all very welcome to come.
that's going to be very interesting. Talking around all these people,
Yeah, exactly.
and maybe talking to them all about painting, and then interested to see their responses and get the most honest of responses. That's one of the most useful things about having friends who are painters, because they can just come in and say, that's crap. But I really think you should change that. That colour doesn't work. Complete honesty is so
Yeah.
important.
Are there any other questions?
They sail in and say, "Hey, Barley Boy, what were you thinking?"
I don't know if you're comfortable sort of talking about your personal interests, but I was just curious whether literature and poetry or art were the earliest things that you were interested in, and were your parents sort of guiding lights? Are they artists, writers, something? And if not, was there a particular art teacher that may have steered you? And if so, could you give her a first and last name? Because I think teachers are so underrated at times.
Both my parents are English teachers, and you can tell that's really useful. Both of these books I stole from their schools. But yeah, they're so useful that I can just, whenever I've hit a bit of the wasteland and I've decided it might mean about 10 different things, I call them up. And even though that's...
And they give you a 12th.
Yeah,
Yeah.
they give me a 12th, or give me 3 most likely, you know, or just tell me their own decision, and generally one of them's saying something different to the other. But they're so useful to rely on, and it means, I think, that looking at this poetry, I'm not just going to read through it and, having not understood it, it doesn't make me want to just put it in the corner, put it in the bin. It makes me want to try and work things out and do some research into it. But whilst I read a lot of books as a child, I did lots of drawing as well. Did English and art through school. So yeah, it was a bit of a battle. I did my foundation thinking that I was going to do an English degree, but then had such a great time on foundation. Met a brilliant tutor, Mick Maslin, who decided I should be going to Wimbledon. So I applied to the Slade, didn't get in. Went to Wimbledon. But yeah, going to Wimbledon, it's just jam-packed full of brilliant tutors who are all teaching painting because it's a degree in fine art painting.
Yeah.
Firstly, thank you for not being radical.
No problem.
Enjoy what you're doing. An art professional I know recently likened you to the next Francis Bacon. Do you model yourself on any artists, or are you your own man?
Tough call. I'm pretty sure that I keep running with my own ideas, but it does keep coming up that because I've been looking through various other artists, there's bits of paintings that I didn't even realise were a reference copying other artists' bits of work. Because that is the first thing I do whenever a painting's not going well. I look at other artists' work and see what can get me going, get me excited again. But I hope that it can stand its own ground enough to be my own work. But also, I'm not sure I quite fit as a Francis Bacon. I'm having a great time.
He hasn't had enough to drink tonight anyway, that's fun. Any other questions?
Yeah, just to reference back to the Francis Bacon quote, the picture on the back wall of the 3 portraits on top of each other is a very Bacon kind of image. And the way that you place a figure within an abstract scheme is very Bacon-esque. But he always made kind of statements that were quite violent at times, or very loving, or very emotional. But these, as we've already discussed, are narratives. But there also seems to be a real theatricality about it.
Yeah.
Because I came to this without knowing it was a wasteland, and I came in and saw a figure and 18 King Lears. And I wonder what you think of that.
Brilliant. I mean that's what I'm really hunting
Given
for.
she's
Is
in the room, I don't want to say she's a figure.
but yeah, this is the drama that I'm looking for, and that's something that I do as much as I can, go into the theatre. And I've really hoped that I could pull some of that theatrical element into these paintings. I went to see what's it called, View from the Bridge at the New Vic about a month, maybe a few weeks before I passed these over to you, and it really gave me a fair bit of guts because it was one of the most dramatic things I've ever seen. and just a completely empty space with actors just owning it and bringing in tiny little objects which meant so much. And so it did mean that I started painting things out in various paintings, trying to make them more empty spaces so those little bits in a painting meant more.
You've got to go and see the new Medea.
The new Medea. Oh yeah, I've read about that one. I went to see the Crucible a couple of days ago.
Sounds as if Medea might be your sort of thing.
Well, we'll say thank you very much to these two. Thanks very much for being here. And you're welcome to stick around. We might start moving the chairs just purely so you can see the paintings a bit better. We might move them.
Well, you ought to tell them to form an orderly queue, put their names down for the new painting.
Yes, there is a waiting room.